After 25 years of taking orders, sleeping in mud, and learning to identify different types of incoming artillery by sound alone, you develop a deep, almost spiritual appreciation for boredom. Boredom is a luxury. It's the absence of existential dread, the sweet, sweet sound of nothing happening. When I retired from the U.S. Army, I didn't want adventure or a corner office. I wanted the most profound, soul-enriching, mind-numbing tranquility a man could buy. I wanted to be able to sit on my own porch in my own house and think about absolutely nothing for hours on end. So I bought a house in Oakhaven Estates. Even the name sounded sleepy. Oakhaven. It conjured images of gentle, dappled sunlight and the rustle of friendly, non-threatening leaves. Estates. That just sounded like the houses were slightly farther apart. It was perfect. A quiet, manicured subdivision in suburban North Carolina, a place so beige and orderly it seemed like a different planet from the dusty, chaotic landscapes of my career. I'd spent decades dealing with warlords, insurgents, and jumped-up sergeants major on power trips. I figured I had earned a lifetime supply of peace and quiet. I thought my days of dealing with petty tyrants were over. Then I met Brenda. My first real taste of the Oakhaven experience didn't come from a welcoming fruit basket, but from a clipboard. I'd been in the house for about a month, still marveling at the novelty of having more than one drawer for all my socks, when the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a woman in her mid-60s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed iron-gray hair and eyes that seemed to be actively scanning my property for infractions. She was holding a clipboard like it was a scepter. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Just Jack," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't return the courtesy. "I'm Brenda Lastname, president of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association." She said Homeowners Association, with the same reverence some people use for Supreme Allied Command. "A pleasure," I lied. She wasn't here for pleasantries. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger towards my curb. "Your refuse receptacle," she announced, as if identifying an enemy combatant. "It's positioned 3.5 inches too far to the left of your driveway." I just stared at her. Then I looked at the large, unassuming garbage bin sitting exactly where the trash collectors could easily find it. I looked back at Brenda. The silence stretched. My brain, trained to assess threats and formulate strategic responses, came up completely empty. This was a threat matrix I had never encountered. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice flat. "Did you say 3.5 inches?" "To be precise," she said, consulting her clipboard. "It's in violation of Article 4, Section B, Paragraph 7 of the Oakhaven HOA covenants, which dictates that all receptacles must be placed in perfect alignment with the right-hand edge of the driveway slab. For uniformity." I continued to stare. I thought about the absurdity of it all. I'd once helped coordinate an emergency airlift using 3 different languages and a packet of chewing gum, and this woman was briefing me on the geostrategic importance of trash can placement. The old me, the Sergeant Callahan me, would have had some very choice, very direct feedback for her. But the new me, the retired, peace-seeking me, opted for a different tactic. "Brenda," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I have a laser level in the garage. If you need to borrow it for a more accurate measurement next time, you just let me know." The smile I received in return was thin and cold. It was the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse just before the final squeeze. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Our community standards are what keep property values high. A bin that is not in perfect alignment suggests chaos." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And chaos is a slippery slope." I just nodded slowly. Right. First a misplaced trash can, Next thing you know, we're churning our own butter and sacrificing goats to pagan deities. Got it. I gave her a mock salute and moved the bin the requisite 3.5 inches to the right. As I went back inside, I had the distinct feeling that this was not the end of my interactions with Brenda, the self-appointed guardian of suburban order. A few months of blessed silence followed. I settled in. I built out my workshop in the garage, a sanctuary of sawdust and gun oil. I found the best local brewery. I was lulled into a false sense of security. I thought maybe the garbage bin incident was just her hazing the new guy. I was wrong. It was just the first probing attack, testing my defenses before the main assault. The casus belli, the thing that kicked off the whole ridiculous, undeclared war, arrived in a flat, official-looking package via FedEx. I saw the return address was the governor's office in Raleigh, and felt a flicker of curiosity. I opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside was a letter, thick and creamy, with the governor's seal embossed at the top. It was a formal commendation for my volunteer work 6 months prior. Hurricane Ida's remnants had swerved inland and stalled out over the eastern part of the state, dumping biblical amounts of rain and causing catastrophic flooding. Through a veterans network, I'd gotten linked up with the state's official volunteer search and rescue division. My mind flashed back to it for a second. The smell of swamp water and diesel fumes. The exhaustion that went so deep it felt like it was in your bones. Pulling a terrified family of 5, plus their soaking wet cat, out of an attic window and onto a flat-bottomed boat. The quiet, stoic bravery of the other volunteers, electricians, nurses, teachers, all covered in the same gray-brown mud, all running on caffeine and sheer willpower. It wasn't fun, but it was good work. It was necessary. Beneath the letter, nestled in tissue paper, was the token of that necessity. It wasn't a medal or a plaque. It was a pennant, a simple triangular flag, about 2 feet long. One half was bright, safety orange, the other a crisp white. Stitched in the center was the state seal and the official insignia of the SAR division. It was understated, professional, and meant more to me than any of the dozen or so military medals tucked away in my sock drawer. Those were for my job. This was for something I chose. My house came with a small, unassuming flagpole attached to the porch column. It was the kind of thing people use for seasonal banners. The previous owner had left behind a faded "Welcome Spring" flag, which I'd never bothered to take down. It seemed right. This felt like a better use for it. I went outside into the bright afternoon sun, took down the cheerful, flowery banner, and carefully clipped the SAR pennant to the halyard. I hoisted it up. It caught the breeze immediately, the orange and white standing out cleanly against the pale blue sky and the beige siding of my house. It was tasteful. It was small. And to my eye, it looked damn good. I went back inside, grabbed a cold beer from the fridge, and came back out to my porch rocker. I sat there for a while, just looking at it, feeling a quiet, profound sense of pride. This was the life. A comfortable chair, a cold drink, and a small symbol of a job well done fluttering in the breeze. I gave it 3 hours before Brenda's orbital surveillance system would detect the unauthorized display of pride and dispatch an enforcement drone. I was off by 2 hours. Just as I was finishing my beer, I saw her. Brenda was doing her afternoon constitutional, power walking down the sidewalk in a pastel-colored tracksuit. She moved with the relentless pace of a Terminator. Her head was on a swivel, scanning, always scanning. As she passed my house, her eyes locked onto the pennant. She stopped dead. Her forward momentum ceased so abruptly I was surprised she didn't leave skid marks on the concrete. She stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Her face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: confusion, curiosity, and then settling into its final form, a look of pure, unadulterated outrage. She didn't say a word to me. She just narrowed her eyes, turned, and marched back toward her own house, her pace now even more clipped and furious. Oh yeah, this was going to be a problem. An hour later, I went to check the mail. Tucked neatly under my door handle, placed with an aggressive precision that was becoming all too familiar, was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. Official letterhead of the Oak Haven Homeowners Association. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. But I did anyway, savoring the moment. I stood on my porch, under my new Pennant, and read the charges aloud to myself, my voice dripping with the sarcasm the document so richly deserved. Violation notice #8812C to the resident of 112 Oak Street. That's me, I muttered. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee. The committee of one, I added. That an unapproved and non-standard flag-like object has been affixed to your facade. Flag-like object. It sounded like evidence from a UFO crash. What, did she think it was alien technology? A communications device for a hostile power? This is in direct violation of Bylaw 17.4, which strictly prohibits any flags other than the official flag of the United States of America, the North Carolina state flag, or pre-approved non-verbal seasonal banners. Please remedy this violation within 24 hours to avoid a fine of $50. A secondary fine will be assessed for each subsequent 24-hour period of non-compliance. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh. Not a quiet chuckle, but a full, deep belly laugh. The kind of laugh you have when you're exhausted and the absurdity of the world just hits you all at once. It was magnificent in its pettiness, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. I folded the notice neatly, tucked it into my back pocket, and went inside. The quiet life was officially over. Game on, Brenda, game on. The next morning, I decided a direct, diplomatic approach was the best opening strategy. You always offer your opponent a chance to de-escalate before you bring in the heavy artillery. I found Brenda in her natural habitat, her front yard, which was less a lawn and more a botanical specimen under 24-hour guard. Her petunias were arranged in perfect, color-coordinated rows. Her grass was an unnatural shade of green, so uniform it looked like carpet. She was wearing pristine gardening gloves and a comically large sun visor, snipping at a rose bush with the intense focus of a bomb disposal expert. "Brenda," I said, my tone even and friendly. "Got your little love note?" She didn't look up from her work. Her shears gave a vicious snip, decapitating a flawless pink rose. "It's not a love note, Mr. Callahan. It's an official notice of violation, and we're not on a first-name basis." "Right. My mistake," I said, the sarcasm light, almost undetectable. "Well, regarding my flag-like object, I think there's been a simple misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," she said, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were like little gray pebbles. "There is only a violation. That thing on your porch is an eyesore, and it is not in compliance." "See, that's where you're wrong," I countered, still keeping it friendly. "It's not a decoration. It's a state-issued pennant, a commendation for my volunteer search and rescue service during the hurricane last year." I expected a flicker of understanding, maybe a moment of, "Oh, I see." I did not get that. What I got was a blank stare, followed by a dismissive wave of her shears. "I don't care if it was hand-delivered by the ghost of George Washington himself," she snapped. "Look at it. It's orange. It's pointy. It doesn't match anything. Is it the flag of the United States?" "No, but it's..." "Is it the flag of the great state of North Carolina?" She cut me off, her voice rising. It was issued by the state, I repeated, my patience starting to fray. It's an official emblem of service. The bylaws are explicit, she said, stabbing the air with her shears for emphasis. I wrote them myself. Explicit. No exceptions. Exceptions are the first crack in the dam. Exceptions are how you get chaos. Right. The slippery slope to damnation, I murmured. So, let me just be absolutely clear on this. You, Brenda last name, in your official capacity as president of the Oak Haven Homeowners Association, are ordering me, a private citizen, to remove a commendation for service that was awarded to me by the governor of this state. She gave me a triumphant little smirk. I'm ordering you to follow the rules you agreed to when you purchased your home. It's that simple. The object comes down, or the fines begin. Have a lovely, compliant day. She turned her back on me, the ultimate power move, and gave another perfect Rose the Guillotine treatment. The message was crystal clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a decree. I walked away, not angry, but with a strange, familiar feeling bubbling in my chest. It was the feeling I used to get right before a mission, a calm, focused sense of exhilaration. The battle lines were drawn. The next day, as expected, another cream-colored envelope appeared, this time taped to my front door with an aggressive amount of Scotch tape. I peeled it off, taking a bit of paint with it. The fine had doubled to $100. The language had escalated. It now contained phrases like willful disregard and threatened further unspecified action if compliance was not met with immediate effect. I decided it was time to go up the chain of command. Surely there was someone, somewhere, with a sliver of common sense. I looked up the number for the HOA management company, a faceless corporation called Sterling Community Solutions, based out of Charlotte. They handled the money and the official paperwork. They were, in theory, Brenda's bosses. After navigating a phone tree that seemed deliberately designed by a team of sadists to induce rage quitting, I finally got a human being. Her name was Cheryl, and she sounded about as enthusiastic as someone waiting for a root canal. Sterling Community Solutions, this is Cheryl, how can I help you? She droned. Hi, Cheryl. My name is Jack Callahan. I'm a resident at Oak Haven Estates. I'm trying to resolve a violation notice that I believe was issued in error. Okay, she said, followed by the loud, clacking sound of keyboard typing. What's the violation and property address? The address is 112 Oak Street. The violation is for a flag, or as the notice calls it, a flag-like object. I could hear her typing. The thing is, Cheryl, it's not a decoration. It's an official search and rescue pennant issued to me by the state. Uh-huh, she said, the epitome of disinterest. Oak Haven Estates, Bylaw 17.4. Okay, I see the violation here in the system. It was submitted by your HOA board president, Brenda last name. Right, that's what I'm telling you. Brenda is mistaken. This is an official commendation, not a SpongeBob banner. The violation itself is invalid. Well, sir, Cheryl sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested she'd had this exact conversation 1,000 times. Our role here at Sterling is to administrate and enforce the decisions of the elected board. The system says it's a violation logged by the president. Did you remove the flag-like object? No, Cheryl, I did not remove the flag-like object, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. I am trying to explain to you that it shouldn't be a violation. Well, I understand your position, sir, but you'll have to take that up with your board president at your next scheduled meeting. Our hands are tied. The violation stands. Would you like to pay the outstanding $100 fine over the phone today with a Visa or MasterCard? There is a 3% processing fee. I have rarely, in my entire life, been rendered so completely speechless. I just hung up. The management company wasn't a higher authority. It was just Brenda's hired muscle, a bureaucratic firewall designed to absorb complaints and wear people down. There was no reasoning with the system. It was time to change tactics. The next afternoon, I was in my kitchen, cleaning my coffee maker, when the flash of red and blue lights swept across my window. I looked out. A local police cruiser was parked at my curb, and standing on her porch across the street, arms crossed in a posture of ultimate vindication, was Brenda. She had a smug, triumphant smile on her face. She actually did it. The absolute madwoman called the cops on me, over a flag. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I pushed it down. Stay calm. Let the opponent make the mistakes. I opened my front door before they even had a chance to knock, and stood there, leaning on the frame. 2 officers got out. One was older, with tired eyes and a salt and pepper mustache. He looked like he'd been on the force since the invention of donuts. The other was younger, barely out of his 20s, with a crisp uniform and an expression of earnest confusion. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, did the talking. "Afternoon, sir," he said, his voice a low rumble of weary professionalism. "We, received a call about a disturbance at this address." "A disturbance?" I replied, letting a small, amused smile play on my lips. "Let me guess. Is it about the great flag heist of 2025? Miller's eyes flickered up to the Pennant, then back to me. A long, slow sigh escaped his lips. The complainant. The complainant mentioned a resident was flying an unauthorized and potentially offensive flag. The younger officer, Davies, chimed in. She suggested it might be related to some kind of sovereign citizen group." I burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. "Sovereign citizen? Ma'am, that's a state-issued search and rescue pennant. The only thing it's sovereign over is my porch." I gestured for them to take a closer look. "That's it. That's the offender. Be careful. It's pointy." Davies cracked a smile he couldn't quite suppress. Miller just looked exhausted. "Look, officers, I know you have better things to do," I said, changing my tone to one of friendly cooperation. I quickly and calmly explained the entire situation, from Brenda's first notice to my call with the feckless Cheryl. I went inside and brought out the official letter from the governor and the HOA violation notices. I handed them to Miller. He read the governor's letter, then looked at the HOA notice. He looked up at the Pennant. He looked over at Brenda, who was still standing on her porch, watching the drama unfold. He looked back at me. "So let me get this straight," Miller said, handing the papers back. "The HOA lady, Brenda." "The one and only," I confirmed. Called 911 because you're flying a commendation for service issued by the governor of North Carolina?" "In her defense," I said with a straight face, "it does suggest a certain level of chaos." Davies had to turn away, his shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Miller just pinched the bridge of his nose. "Sir," he said, his voice strained with forced formality, "this is a civil matter. It's between you and your homeowners association. You're not breaking any laws. We can't make you take your flag down. We have no authority here." He paused, then added, "Honestly, sir, thank you for your service. We're sorry to have bothered you." As they got back in their cruiser, Miller walked over to Brenda's property line. I couldn't hear what he said, but I didn't need to. His body language was a universal dialect of, "Do not waste our time like this again." Brenda's smug, triumphant look melted away, replaced by a scowl of pure fury. She stomped back into her house and slammed the door. Point Jack. The police visit, however brief, had an unintended consequence. It drew attention. My quiet little cul-de-sac was suddenly buzzing. Neighbors who had previously only offered a polite wave were now looking at my house with open curiosity. The Pennant once an innocuous object, was now a symbol. That evening, Gary, my next-door neighbor, caught me as I was taking out the perfectly aligned recycling bin. Gary was a man in his 50s who looked perpetually nervous, as if he was always worried he'd forgotten to turn off the stove. "Hey, Jack," he said, shuffling his feet. "Saw the police activity earlier. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Gary. Just a slight disagreement with the HOA command structure." "Yeah, about that," he said, lowering his voice. "The flag, it's nice. But you know, Brenda, wouldn't it just be easier to take it down? Just to keep the peace?" I understood his position. Gary was a civilian. He didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. "I appreciate the sentiment, Gary," I said politely. "But sometimes keeping the peace means letting the bullies win. I'm not inclined to do that." He just nodded nervously and scurried back inside. But not all the feedback was negative. A little later, a young woman I recognized from a few houses down was walking by with her stroller. She stopped at the edge of my driveway. "You're Jack, right?" she asked. "I am." "I'm Sarah. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "My cousin and her family," she said, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "They live out in Haywood County. They were trapped in their house by the flooding last year. Your team, the SAR guys, you're the ones who got them out." She looked up at the Pennant. "When I heard what Brenda was doing, I was furious. So, thank you. And don't you dare take that thing down." She gave me a warm smile and continued her walk. And just like that, I had an ally. The neighborhood wasn't a monolith. Brenda didn't speak for everyone. The police visit and Sarah's support solidified my resolve. This was no longer just about a piece of cloth. It was about principle. And I decided it was time to stop playing defense and open a second front. For weeks, I'd been planning a small backyard project. A simple paver patio, just big enough for my grill, a small table, and a couple of chairs. A place to enjoy the tranquility I'd been fighting for. According to the HOA Bible, any exterior modification or improvement required formal approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which was, of course, Brenda. This was my strategic counteroffensive. I spent an evening drawing up meticulous plans. I measured everything twice. I used a 3D modeling program to create a rendering. The design was tasteful, modest, and 100% compliant with every written rule in the covenant, from the color of the pavers to the setback from the property line. It was unassailable. I submitted the application through the official HOA web portal, attached all my diagrams and documents, and clicked send. The ball was in her court. The response came 2 days later via email. The subject line was simply, "Application denied." I opened the email, my heart pounding with a strange mix of anger and morbid curiosity. I had to know what ridiculous, trumped-up reason she'd invented. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of petty bureaucratic fiction, denial due to violation of the newly ratified Bylaw 22.8, the preservation of community soil integrity. The proposed excavation and introduction of a non-permeable surface would irreparably disrupt the natural aesthetic and ecological balance of the community's indigenous topsoil. I read it twice. Community soil integrity. She'd invented a new rule, on the spot, to block my patio. My dirt. She had declared my backyard dirt a protected natural resource. I was so impressed by the sheer unmitigated gall of it that I wasn't even mad. I was inspired. It was time to call in reinforcements. I did a quick search for top-rated local masonry contractors, and the first name that popped up was Mike's Masonry, with a slew of 5-star reviews. I dialed the number. A gruff, friendly voice answered on the second ring. "You got Mike?" "Hi, Mike. My name is Jack Callahan. I live over in the Oak Haven Estates, and I'm looking to get a quote on a paver patio." Oakhaven, huh? Nice area, he said. It has its moments, I replied dryly. But I've run into a slight administrative hiccup. I was hoping you could give me some advice. My application was denied on the grounds that it would violate the preservation of community soil integrity. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing the sheer absurdity of the phrase. Then, a sound erupted from the phone, a deep, booming laugh that seemed to shake the receiver. "Oh, that is a new one," he roared. "Community soil integrity. I've heard 'em all. But that's poetry, pal. Pure poetry. Let me guess. This wouldn't have anything to do with a short lady. About 65, hair like a silver helmet. Looks like she'd report a cloud for loitering." "You've met Brenda," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "Met her? I did a driveway for the Hendersons over there last year. She tried to fine my company for my truck leaking unapproved atmospheric condensation onto the asphalt. It was water from the AC unit. A true artist, that one." He chuckled again. "Son, you've got yourself a grade A, top-shelf HOA situation. Tell you what, I'm busy this week, but I like a good cause. I'll swing by tomorrow afternoon. No charge for the consultation. We're going to get you that patio. This is about more than just pavers now. This is about freedom." I hung up the phone feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I had an ally, a brother in arms who understood the enemy. The war for Oakhaven was about to enter a new, more aggressive phase. Brenda, feeling emboldened by her successful defense of my backyard soil, decided to press her advantage. A few days later, a notice appeared on the official community message board in the clubhouse lobby. It was printed on lurid pink paper to ensure maximum visibility. "Emergency HOA meeting," it screamed in a 48-point font. "Agenda item #1. Urgent vote. Upholding community standards and addressing the flagrant and continued violation at 112 Oak Street." She was taking it to the court of public opinion. She was going to put my Pennant on trial in front of the whole neighborhood. It was a bold move. It was also a massive miscalculation. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a depressing beige room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. I arrived to find about 20 people scattered among the folding chairs. It was a motley crew. On one side of the room sat Brenda's faction, a handful of older residents who looked like they enjoyed complaining as a competitive sport. On the other side were the neutral and curious parties, and in the back, forming a small island of moral support, were my allies. Sarah, the young mom, who gave me a determined nod, and, to my surprise, Mike, the contractor. He was wearing a polo shirt with Mike's Masonry embroidered on it, and was already cheerfully chatting up some of the other residents, a plate of complimentary cookies in his hand. "Couldn't miss the main event," he whispered as I sat down. "Brought my own popcorn." Brenda stood at a flimsy lectern at the front of the room, a gavel in her hand that she had clearly brought from home. She banged it with far more force than necessary, calling the meeting to order. She then launched into a speech of such breathtaking melodrama that it could have won her a Tony Award. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "We stand today at a precipice, a crossroads. For months we have worked to build a community of order, of beauty, of shared values. But those values are under attack." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping the room. "There is a theory," she continued, "the broken window theory. It states that one broken window, left unrepaired, signals to the world that no one cares, that chaos is welcome. And that, my friends, is what we are facing today. A single, unauthorized, pointy, orange and white, broken window that threatens to unravel the very fabric of our community. It is a visual assault, a flagrant disregard for the rules that protect us, that protect our property values." She went on like this for another 5 minutes, painting me as some kind of nihilistic outsider, a leather-clad anarchist hell-bent on sowing discord and lowering the resale value of their townhomes. It was a masterful performance. When she finally finished, she gestured toward me. "The floor is now open for the accused to speak," she said, as if we were in a star chamber. I didn't go to the podium. I stood from my seat in the middle of the room, holding a simple manila folder. "Evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm Jack, the anarchist from 112 Oak Street. I won't take up too much of your time. Brenda is correct about one thing. This is about rules. So let's look at a few." I opened the folder. First, the rule of gratitude. I held up a crisp copy of the governor's letter. I'm not going to read it all, but it thanks me and my SAR teammates for our service during the hurricane. I'll pass this around so you can see it for yourselves. I handed it to the person next to me. Second, the rules of our country. I held up another paper. This is a printout of the United States Flag Code, Title IV, Chapter 1. It contains specific sections, which I have highlighted, on the proper display of other flags and pennants in conjunction with the American flag. It outlines an order of precedence. The display of such items isn't just allowed, it's anticipated and codified. And third, I said, holding up a final document, the rules of our state. This is from the North Carolina state government's official website. It's a description of the SAR pennant, which it refers to not as a flag-like object, but as an official emblem of service. An honor. I let that hang in the air for a moment. This isn't about a broken window, it's about a thank you. A thank you from the state we live in for service rendered to the people of this state. For Brenda to call that a violation is her right as a citizen. But for her to call it an assault on our community's values is an insult to the very idea of community service. A murmur went through the room. Brenda's cronies looked distinctly uncomfortable. Gary, my timid neighbor, was looking at me with a newfound expression of awe. Then Sarah stood up. "I have something to say," she said, her voice clear and strong. "My cousin is Amy Patterson. Some of you know her. She, her husband, and their 2 little kids live out in Haywood County. They were trapped in their attic for 12 hours during that flood. The water was rising. They thought—" Her voice broke for a second, but she collected herself. "They thought they were going to die. The team that Jack was on, they're the ones who got a boat to them. They're the ones who saved their lives." She turned and looked directly at Brenda. "That visual assault you're talking about, that broken window. For my family, that pennant is a symbol of hope. It's a symbol of the goodness of strangers. For you to stand up here and call it disgusting. Frankly, you're disgusting." The room was silent for a moment, and then it wasn't. A wave of applause and supportive murmurs swept through the non-Brenda faction. The mood had irrevocably shifted. Brenda's face was a mask of incandescent rage. She saw she had lost the room, lost control completely. "This is not a debate!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's a vote on the bylaw!" "Then let's vote," I said calmly. Realizing she was about to suffer a humiliating public defeat, she panicked. She grabbed her gavel and banged it furiously on the lectern. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled over the grumbling. "Adjourned due to procedural irregularities." She gathered her papers and practically fled the room, her cronies scurrying after her like pilot fish. The rest of us were left in stunned silence, which was quickly broken by Mike the contractor. "Well," he boomed, "I'd call that a decisive victory for the forces of good. Who wants more cookies?" The meeting was a public humiliation for Brenda, but I knew it wouldn't be the end. A cornered animal is a dangerous animal. I figured she'd retreat, regroup, and come up with some new, more insidious line of attack. I underestimated her. She didn't retreat. She went completely off the rails. That night, around 11:30, I was on my couch watching a documentary about deep-sea exploration. The house was quiet. The war, for the moment, was over. Then my phone, sitting on the coffee table, buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from my security camera app. Motion detected, porch. My first thought was a raccoon. They were always knocking over the bird feeder. I pulled up the live feed on my phone, expecting to see a furry little bandit. What I saw instead made my jaw drop. The image was in grainy, ethereal night vision green, and there, creeping across my front lawn with the stealth of a drunken elephant, was Brenda. She was dressed head to toe in black sweatpants, black hoodie, black beanie pulled down over her silver hair. She looked like a ninja from a low-budget community theater production of Shogun. And in her hand, gleaming menacingly in the infrared light, was a large pair of garden shears. I sat there, mesmerized, as the scene unfolded. I became a silent narrator for my own private comedy show. "Okay, folks, here we have the predator in its suburban habitat," I muttered to my empty living room. "She's making her approach to the target. A bit clumsy over the sprinkler head there, a 10-point deduction for form. She's reached the porch. She's now directly under the objective. She's looking around, checking for witnesses. The coast is clear." She stood on her tiptoes, reaching up with the shears, trying to snip the pennant itself. But it was just out of her reach. She grunted in frustration. "A minor setback for our operative. She's now changing tactics, going for the flagpole's halyard instead. A bold move. She's trying to cut the rope. But those are for pruning roses, Brenda, not high-tensile flagpole rope. It's not working. She seems to be getting frustrated. She's getting tangled. Oh dear. She's wrapped the rope around her arm. And the shears. This is not going to end well." She was completely ensnared, pulling and twisting, which only made the knot around her arm tighter. She was tethered to my flagpole. I didn't move from the couch. I didn't yell out the window. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed the local police non-emergency line. "Yes, hello?" I said, my voice a model of calm. "I'd like to report a trespass and attempted vandalism currently in progress at 112 Oak Street." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, sir, can you describe the perpetrator?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, it's my HOA president again." "Again?" the dispatcher asked, her voice filled with a weary sense of disbelief. "Yes, again," I confirmed. "This time she's dressed like a cat burglar and is currently tangled in my flagpole." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, the dispatcher said, "Sir, we are dispatching a unit to your location." 2 minutes later, the familiar strobing red and blue lights filled my living room. I watched through the window as the same cruiser pulled up. Officers Miller and Davies got out. Their movements were slow, filled with the profound spiritual exhaustion of men who were seriously questioning every life choice that had led them to this exact moment, on this exact street, for the second time in a week. I saved the video file on my phone, stood up, and went outside. The phone in my hand like a smoking gun. The scene on my porch was even more pathetic in the glare of the police flashlights. Miller was shining his beam directly on Brenda, who was hopelessly, comically trussed up in the flagpole rope, the garden shears dangling uselessly from her wrist. She looked like a marlin that had lost a fight. "Evening, officers," I said, walking calmly onto the porch. "Brenda, looks like you're in a bit of a bind." Brenda's head snapped around. Her face was a mess of panic and fury. I wasn't... I saw that it was flapping loose in the wind," she sputtered, a truly pathetic lie. "I was just trying to secure it, to protect it." "Secure it with these?" I asked, holding up my phone. I turned the screen towards Officer Miller and pressed play. He watched the little green video of Brenda creeping across my lawn, the shears held like a dagger, her clumsy attempts to snip the pennant, her final, fateful struggle with the rope. He watched it all without a word. When it was finished, he closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath, as if praying for strength. Officer Davies, standing behind him, had to turn away completely, his shoulders shaking in a valiant but losing battle against a tidal wave of laughter. Miller opened his eyes. He looked at the video on my phone. He looked at Brenda, tangled in the ropes of her own making. He looked at me, standing there calmly. Then he looked at the half-dozen neighbors who were now peeking out of their windows or standing on their own porches in bathrobes, drawn by the flashing lights. Gary, from next door, was on his driveway, his mouth hanging wide open in silent, slack-jawed astonishment. Finally, Miller turned his gaze back to Brenda. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a man who was simply done. "Ma'am," he said, "please put your hands behind your back." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The story of Brenda's midnight ninja raid spread through Oakhaven like a wildfire in a dry forest. The neighborhood text chains, which usually buzzed with talk of lost cats and garage sales, were now dedicated entirely to what was immediately dubbed Flaggate. The tale grew with each telling, acquiring new, more dramatic details. By lunchtime the next day, the rumor was that she'd been wearing night vision goggles and had tried to rappel down from my roof. Sarah, my ally, seized the moment. She used the official HOA Facebook group to call for an emergency meeting, a legitimate one this time. The topic: a vote of no confidence in the current president. Brenda didn't even show up. It was less of a meeting and more of a revolutionary tribunal. The vote was unanimous. Brenda, last name, was officially deposed. In the power vacuum that followed, all eyes turned to Gary, my timid, conflict-averse neighbor, who had been an eyewitness to Brenda's capture. "I nominate Gary for interim president," Sarah announced. Gary, who was standing nervously in the back, went pale. "Me? No, I just want to make sure my sprinklers are compliant. I don't know anything about running things." "Perfect," Sarah declared. "You're hired. All in favor?" A chorus of ayes sealed his fate. Gary reluctantly accepted his new role, his entire presidential platform consisting of a promise to mostly just leave everyone alone unless their house is literally on fire. He was inaugurated with a round of thunderous applause. The reign of terror was over. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Officer Miller. "Mr. Callahan," he said, his voice sounding remarkably more cheerful than the last time we'd spoken. "Just calling with an update. The D.A quote. S office reviewed the report on the, flagpole incident. They want to know if you intend to press charges for trespassing and attempted property damage against Mrs. Last Name." I thought about it for a second. I pictured Brenda in a courtroom. I pictured the fines, the community service, and it all felt like overkill. The public humiliation she had endured was a far more fitting and poetic punishment than anything the legal system could cook up. She wasn't some criminal mastermind. She was just a deeply unhappy person whose world had shrunk until all that was left was the length of her neighbor's grass and the placement of their trash cans. "You know what, Miller?" I said. "Tell them I'm dropping it. I have a feeling she's not going to be a problem anymore." I could hear the relief in his sigh. "God bless you, son. Honestly, God bless you. I think we've all had enough of this particular case file." My instincts were right. The following weekend, a "for sale" sign appeared on Brenda's unnaturally green lawn. A week after that, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. I was in my workshop when she loaded the last box into her car. She looked up and saw me watching from the garage. We held each other's gaze for a long moment across the meticulously manicured battlefield. There was no anger in it, no malice, just a quiet, weary acknowledgement of the absurd little war we had waged. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, got into her car, and drove away, leaving Oakhaven Estates behind for good. With Brenda gone, the administrative logjam that had plagued the neighborhood instantly cleared. I resubmitted my application for the patio to Interim President Gary. It was approved within 7 minutes, with a note that just said, "Looks great, Gary." Mike the contractor and his crew showed up the next week to begin work. He slapped me on the back with a hand the size of a cinder block. "Heard you staged a coup, you old soldier," he boomed, laughing. "Overthrew the government and installed a puppet regime. I love it. Tell you what, for services rendered to the cause of freedom, I'm giving you the regime change discount. 10% off all labor and materials." A month later, the war was a distant memory. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon in early fall. The air was cool and crisp. I was sitting on my brand-new, beautifully laid paver patio, a cold beer in my hand. The savory smoke from the grill wafted through the air, and on my porch, fluttering proudly in the gentle breeze, the orange and white SAR pennant danced in the sun. I saw a figure shuffling hesitantly across my lawn. It was President Gary, holding a piece of paper like it was a live grenade. Jack? Hi," he said, stopping a respectful distance from the patio. "Hope I'm not bothering you. The board, well, we held a quick meeting." I braced myself. "Don't tell me my grill smoke is violating the clean air bylaw, Gary?" "No, God, no, nothing like that," he said, horrified at the suggestion. We just wanted to give you this." He nervously handed me the paper. It was a formal, typed letter. At the top it said, "An official apology from the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association." Below the short, sincere letter of apology for the previous misunderstanding, there was a new section, Amendment to Bylaws. Bylaw 17.5. Notwithstanding Bylaw 17.4, the display of any official flag, pennant, or banner awarded or issued by the United States Armed Forces or by any federal, state, or local government agency in recognition of service to the community is hereby expressly and enthusiastically permitted. Gary looked at me, his eyes wide with hope. "We also fired that management company," he added in a rush. "They were really rude. So, is everything okay? Are you happy?" I looked at the paper, then at Gary's terrified rabbit face, and then at the peaceful, quiet neighborhood around me. A slow smile spread across my face. "Gary," I said, raising my beer in a toast, "everything is perfect." He looked profoundly relieved and scurried back to the safety of his own yard. I leaned back in my chair and took a long sip of my beer. I came here looking for boredom and tranquility, and somehow ended up in a suburban firefight over a 2-foot piece of cloth. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. And looking back, it was absolutely worth it. Sometimes you have to fight, not because you enjoy it, but because letting a bully win, no matter how petty their kingdom, chips away at something important. It turns out the most important battles aren't always fought on some foreign, dusty field. Sometimes they're fought for the right to be left alone in your own home, for the right to honor your past, and for the simple, profound right to tell a petty tyrant to go pound sand. I raised my bottle in a silent salute to the little orange and white pennant, a monument to service, and a trophy from a war I never wanted, but was damn glad I'd won. The only sound was the gentle breeze, the distant laughter of kids playing, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill. It was the best damn sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of peace.